Oh, hey, hi, what's up? Hello. What a wonderful day.
Those
Um,
microphones are sensitive.
yeah, yes, they are. Jason, I can see Jason adjusting their sound a lot during the show.
Yeah, that's
Um,
weird. I'm hearing you.
are you not used to hearing like multiple input, like from a person in a,
Yeah,
that,
it's been years I've done this.
yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, perfect.
So Xander, that was the issue before. Remember, I think you tried out in the cooking studio
Mhm.
and you wanted to use this camera instead of a webcam, but it was the audio issue. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, no, you're what you've got in your head is right. We record these quite far ahead of time. So this this episode will release in like late June, on the podcasting podcasting schedule. So we're wondering like how do we say we're taking a break, but we're not taking a break now, but we're taking a break later. So huh? No breaks. All right, Scott. I guess we gotta. Have you heard of 20? Have you seen or heard of 24-hour live streams? Like people do live stream for a full 24 hours on like Twitch or YouTube. So Rob, we got to do a 24-hour library history live stream. You ready? I mean, a live stream. Those typically have a lot of people coming in as guests. Filter out. So like not as like you're still there the whole time, no matter what. But you'll have like there would be like, I don't know, Kathy or Elliot coming in. Other all of our history people in the library um that just want to walk in. So all right. For a second. Yeah. If you couldn't tell already.
Yes, good. This is Jody. I emailed out to our board members if they'd like to show up. She's on our board. Gonna volunteer with us as well. Also others stop by. So hopefully we'll get a little bit more. We'll see what happens.
That's all right, we go.
Put up
People will be watching it or whatever.
Yeah.
Because we were gonna record it anyways.
Yeah, so. Correct. Well, actually, I take that back. We had, Scott's department or.
Yeah, they came in one day to see how we did it. Maybe it was about 6 people. Oh, yeah. Good.
Well, I got a shot here. Yeah, if you wanna come up closer.
Front row or second row here?
Maybe just at the two.
This one's okay?
I don't know about all this televised.
Scott. Oh, I still remember that first one. You were so nervous. And then you started talking.
I hear them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one thing to learn. This one was mitochondrial DNA, which I didn't.
I don't know about mitochondrial DNA, so we'll learn. We'll learn.
We talk about that.
Okay. Where put it? We seriously are like we get emails that are like your podcast has been accepted to, and we're just like, oh, Rob did something. So, we literally got 3 this morning, and we're just like, cool, I guess. Yeah, because Robin. They do work in the background. Like Scott's like the most forward person because he's the one doing all the research, and Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cruising Through History's second. We have done it live before, but it was like a small group of colleagues. Second live show, live podcast.
Live.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're live. Yep.
I shouldn't have asked
You're
that.
live, Scott.
Okay, I probably shouldn't have asked that.
So yeah, we're here. So there's a few things I kind of want to point out. We're live. We're in a different room than we usually are. Our voices are echoing more than usual. So a few folks, of course, Scott is right over there. For those folks that don't know him, I'm Zander. There are actually two people in the room that you probably aren't even going to see on the camera, but they're here. They're never acknowledged on the show, really. They do a lot in the background. We have Rob Nunez sitting at the laptop controlling the live broadcast. Thank you for joining us live, by the way. We appreciate it. Wherever you are, whether it's Kenosha or California or Nebraska, Texas, I don't know, France,
somewhere
I
in Europe.
somewhere, or their VPNs are in Europe, something like that.
Right, yeah.
So Rob Nunez over there, and then we have Jason in the back waving to the back of the camera. And he is always in the room recording the shows for us, doing our sound checks, making sure we sound nice and pretty for the microphones, and of course today making sure we look pretty. So we were just talking about makeup before we went live, and we don't need makeup to look pretty on these cameras.
Probably not.
So yeah, Scott, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling all right.
Okay. So what we're gonna kind of aim to do today. We have our show, of course, 30 minutes of cruising through history. The show we're doing will actually be released in the regular schedule. We schedule these, go figure, in June. So you all are getting an early treat of how we're ending our second season of Cruising Through History. So yay. Thank you, listeners and newcomers, for joining us on this grand journey. Yeah, Scott, how have you felt recording for like almost 2 years?
It's been fine. I'm always worried I won't talk long enough, but I don't think that's ever a problem.
No, I think I was looking back, and we're always like 29 to 32 minutes, which
Right,
is like
right.
right on point.
Yeah.
So that's good. The people that you're going to be viewing us, you're going to see us make hand gestures and cuts and look at each other funny. Yeah, that stuff happens when we're recording and adjust our voices too.
Right.
So we're going to do the same thing. It's kind of just how people doing like voice shows.
Right, and if you've
communicate.
listened to a few of the shows, it's kind of a running gag that I'm constantly waving my arms.
Yeah, now we get to see it.
So, yes, I can't just sit still.
Yeah. So people who are at Southwest Library Live, and you can still make it, we're still here.
Right.
Go ahead and you can silence your phones, do your thing. We may have people walk in during the show, and that's okay.
Right.
But I think we're gonna kind of just get started, right?
Yeah.
You feeling good? We're good to get started.
Okay.
Technical folks.
All right.
Hello and welcome to Cruising Through History. I'm sitting here live with Scott Cruz. Scott, where are we cruising through today?
Well, Xander, I thought I'd talk about, the last one we did, we talked about a detective,
Mhm.
one of the first ones. And so I thought I'd talk about a case and what would be the best case to talk about than Jack the Ripper.
Ooh, Jack. So Jack the Ripper. We're talking like England, right? For
Yes.
Jack the Ripper.
19th century, fog, all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And
So.
and so how? I guess where are we starting with this one? Because I mean, Jack the Ripper. I know the name, but
Right.
What's actually?
Well, it's
going on?
interesting because we all know that there were 5 victims. They're called the canonical 5 because they're the only ones during that time, the contemporaneous records, that were all linked to each other. But there's like 11 murders that happened in Whitechapel, which is in the East End of London, between 1888 and 1891. Now, these 5 were all killed in the fall of 1888, but they're the only ones that have been connected. And so, and there was never any good witnesses. So this is why I think this case keeps going, because no one knows really who did it. But the farther we get away from it, the worse that's going to get because of the evidence. There really is not much evidence left.
Yeah, nothing's going to just crop up and be like, this is Jack the Ripper. Like at this point, whoever, and this is unsolved, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
whoever Jack the Ripper is isn't going to like come from the grave. They're probably long dead by now.
Yes. Well, you'd hope so, since that was 135 years ago. But
You know, if there's
but
a
if
Jack
not,
the Ripper,
then, you know,
might be a little horror movie going on.
right? Yeah, exactly. So, but you know, Whitechapel, along with other cities, you know, we've talked about this in some other podcast. The 19th century, how you went from a lot of, agricultural people moved to the cities. There was a lot of urbanization, industrialization. London was no different. The East End, which had Whitechapel and other places. And the funny thing about London history is all these places have different names, but they're all in London. So in the late 19th century, there were many Irish immigrants who went to Whitechapel and Jewish refugees who had come from Russia because there were pogroms against them and in Eastern Europe. And at one point, they approximated the population of just Whitechapel to be 80,000 people. And so you can guess what's coming with all this. You get a lot of the, it becomes kind of a slum. And so you get a lot of what you'd get there. There's crime. There's a lot of poverty. 55% of children born before 5 years of age died. And so it's a mix of all these different things. And it's a high crime area too. And so, so you have this, it's almost like there's a lot of victims waiting. And the fact that these murders happened, it's really weird because they always happened either before a weekend or before a holiday. So the police always thought it was someone who worked. I don't know, hey, it's day off tomorrow. Let's go commit some kind of murder. But
Happy Friday.
yes. And so, but they all happened not right after each other. So the first one was Mary Ann Nichols, and that was August 31st. The second one was Annie Chapman on September 8th. And then there was 2 on the same day, Elizabeth Stride on September 30th, Catherine Edos on September 30th. And then there's this period where nothing happens, and then Mary Jane Kelly on November 8th.
And those are canonical.
Those are the 5. They are pretty sure at the time, and now too, they were linked because it was a lot of the MO was the same. Some of the other ones that happened, they kind of were, but they weren't really. So even police at the time, law enforcement at the time, couldn't agree on who might have been doing this. And when you get eyewitness accounts, they would say something like, well, he was of fair complexion, or he was of dark complexion, or these are the same people. They're all seeing the same thing.
And they're just not consistent, though. There's
no,
no
and you got to
consistency.
remember, you probably have gaslighting. I was thinking of this one. And so it's probably very much dark. You're not going to really see a lot, I don't think.
Yeah, because if you can put someone in a certain light and then put them in a different light, and their skin color will just look completely different.
And the problem we have, I think, in our age, looking at this, is we've had all these different Jack the Rippers come down to us from history, what he supposedly looked like. The aristocrat with a top hat and a cape. I think if there was some dude running around Whitechapel with a top hat on, someone probably would have noticed that.
And the thing is, we don't even know if it's like, you say he, but we don't even know a gender on this, do we?
Well, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, he suggested it was a woman who did it. So, Jill the Ripper, if you will. But even Jack the Ripper, they didn't call him that at the time.
Ooh, what did they call him?
The police just called him the Whitechapel murderer, or else he had this nickname of Leather Apron. Now, the Leather Apron thing's interesting because there was a character that wasn't very pleasant. I think he was a butcher or something that worked in Whitechapel who wore a leather apron, and these women were prostitutes, so he would usually go to them. And so, but he was never a suspect. They never suspected him, but for some reason this name stuck. But the problem is there was another, in Whitechapel, there was a Jewish shoemaker whose nickname was Leather Apron. But because people were getting kind of hysterical about not catching this guy, the police had to arrest him and haul him in. He had alibis, but just because he had a nickname of Leather Apron, things were getting kind of, and there was even a Whitechapel Vigilance Committee that sprung up like in October of 1888, because there was a lot of feeling in the press that the police weren't doing enough to catch this person.
Yeah.
But the press themselves were also ratcheting this up because the police weren't forthcoming with a lot of information. So they were just filling in the gaps, whether they were true or not.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, you see that in even the press now. Like, if there's no information, they're going to pontificate or just put stuff in there that could be
Right.
it and try to analyze it, but there's nothing there. But doesn't change the fact that people are scared, and then if they don't have information,
Right.
they're going to throw out whoever, who's going to be the scapegoat for everyone to make people feel safe.
Right. And in fact, once at one of the murder scenes of Catherine Edos, there was some graffiti scrawled on the wall, and it said something like, "The Jews won't be blamed for nothing." Now, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Whitechapel at the time, but they don't know if that was connected or if it was already written there. And Jews was spelled Juwes, so it was spelled wrong. So some people said, "Oh no, that's Yiddish," and that's not what it means. It just was a misspelling. So the interesting thing about the two that were killed on the same day, in September 30th, they think that he was interrupted with the first one, and then he went and found another victim.
Yeah, I'm wondering how did these get connected between these canonical five? Like you said, they're connected two on the same day.
It was the method. It was usually a throat slashing. I'm not trying to get too bad here, but with then mutilation that happened after that. And so they figured they all were kind of the same, but they did increase in ferocity as you went. But after Mary Jane Kelly, it kind of stopped. Even though there were more, they weren't like that. I think that's why, to this day, people don't tie those other ones to this. But then again, there was a person named Edmund Reed. He was a detective, and he worked at H Division, which was in Whitechapel. He actually investigated this for the Metropolitan Police. And the strange thing is, you had the Metropolitan Police Force in London, but then you had the City of London Police Force, and their jurisdictions didn't cross. And then Scotland Yard got involved. So there's all these three different organizations working on this. But unfortunately for us and researchers, the City of London Police archives were destroyed in World War II during the Blitz, when the Germans dropped bombs on London.
So there's really not going to be a hidden gem somewhere that's just been hiding in a corner.
That's why I think people have just been filling in the blanks on it. But the Metropolitan Police records were still intact, and basically they did detective work. They talked to people, they interviewed surgeons. They actually went to every butcher and slaughterer in Whitechapel, and they interviewed everyone who had worked there in like the last 6 months. But they could never find an exact. I think they had a feeling when they had somebody, they just didn't have enough evidence. And there's so much of this is circumstantial. And yes, there's some strange things that happen, but you can never pin it on somebody, as they would say.
Yeah, it really sounds like, everyone they could have an inkling. We're probably gonna be talking about like who could have done it.
Yes,
but I mean they've got.
That's a good question.
Getting butchers as well as in there. It's probably because of that's how bad they were. Like someone had to have a skill in doing this.
But even at the time, there was a police surgeon named Thomas Bond. They asked him to create what basically is the first profile. What did he think? And his thought was, well, this guy doesn't have any anatomical knowledge or surgical knowledge. But then someone else said, oh, no, this could be a surgeon. So even at the time, no one could agree on what kind of skills this person may have had. So, yeah, it's quite the conundrum.
And you can see my head is turning. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm going to think of something that someone else hasn't thought of already. But really, there's, from what I'm hearing, there's a few key things. They're all brutal themselves.
Yes.
Extremely little evidence, extremely little sight of these happening.
Right.
And And those are two different things and just nothing off to go off. Not even, were there any murder weapons found?
No,
Just
they
nothing.
could tell by the wounds
Mm.
that it was some kind of knife, jagged knife. But most of the other wounds, thank God, were inflicted. Well, not thank God, but were inflicted post-mortem.
Okay.
So these happen afterward. But yeah, but the thing that's weird is in a couple of these cases, when they would come upon the bodies after it happened, they just missed them because the police surgeon would say, "Well, this just happened. Like you can tell, it just happened like in the last hour," because of course everyone would show up, and so but that was different then because people would constantly contaminate crime scenes. There's a book by Judith Flanders called "The Invention of Murder," which is about the Victorian England and its invention of crime, basically. And she said the same thing. You'd have murder sites, or you'd have a site where murder took place. People would show up, like, "Hey, guess what happened over at this house? Let's go see." So they'd walk through, they'd pick up souvenirs. Well, you know what you're doing? You're contaminating the entire crime scene. I mean, we think that. I don't think they knew that.
Yeah.
But we know that. And so to kind of say, well, we have this piece of evidence from long ago, this clinches it.
Yeah, because when people did that, like if someone like walks through a puddle of blood and it leaves a footprint, well, someone may have just contaminated the scene, or it could have been the suspect.
And I think it's thrown researchers off all these years because there's 3 letters that were supposedly written by this person.
Mm-hmm.
One's called the Dear Boss letter that's filled with a lot of grammatical errors. And the Saucy Jack postcard, which makes him sound like you lovable rogue, you Saucy Jack. And then there's the From Hell letter, which of course there's a movie called that with Johnny Depp, and it's about this. And that was sent to the Vigilance Committee in October. Now, those have been kind of proven to be hoaxes. In 1931, a journalist named Fred Best admitted him and a colleague wrote the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jack postcard. And it's true, when handwriting analysts look at it, it's the same handwriting. And it's actually, I think it's Fred Best who came up with Jack the Ripper. That's how he signed it.
Yeah.
And that name stuck. No one calls him Leather Apron anymore. So it's actually Fred Best who sort of gave us that name, which I thought was interesting. I didn't really know that. I just thought that's what they called him at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so even those are hard to parse out because people were always sending these hoax letters and saying, I'm the guy doing all this.
It's almost like a joke or just like
Yeah, it almost
entertainment.
yes. In fact, Fred Best said we sent this letter so we could keep the business going, as he quoted.
Jeez.
And so, well, I don't think he wanted more murders, but I think he wanted the interest to be there. Because remember when we had our Penny Dreadful episode, we had talked about there was an Elementary Education Act in Great Britain in 1880. So even the lower classes or working class people were starting to learn to read. So everyone was literate. So all these newspapers, and you'd have these illustrated police gazettes and stuff like that. So this was perfect for it.
Yeah.
I mean,
and
think
it's-
about that. I mean, this just landed in their lap, and there it is.
And it's going to keep people's interest because, what if a new murder happens? As it
Yes.
goes on, it's just more and more to
I
it.
can't even imagine when you think they're done and then another one happens.
Mhm.
Now, not the same. And the difference with Mary Jane Kelly is she was actually killed indoors. The others weren't. So this always has told people, did she know this person? Was he someone who had frequently gone to her? Someone knew.
Yeah.
And so, but unfortunately, the 5 women, they all had the same thing in common, which I'm sure a lot of the people overall in Whitechapel had. They were separated from their husbands, and then they were sort of abandoned. And there wasn't a lot of work, really. And so in order to afford their lodgings and that, they sort of had to do this. They weren't being turned out or anything. They just would do it so they could make some money.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of unfortunate. I think what I fear, though, is that the more you read about this, the victims themselves almost become like an abstraction, but they were real people.
Yeah.
And they had families too. And so because we've spent all this time speculating on who it might be, but like I said, no eyewitness account has ever been the same. So you're trying to parse all this out, and it's going nowhere.
So really, if we even if we tried to ask, like, who were those major suspects, it's not really going to go anywhere. Was there even
even
major?
you could go to our stacks right now, and there's 3 or 4 books. They all purport to say who did it. All 4 of them are different, and they all say it's based on DNA evidence. Well, what's the problem with that? All 4 of them can't be right. Not even 2 of them can be right.
Mm-hmm.
Because the DNA evidence would only be one person. And so Patricia Cornwell, who writes fiction, she's written books on Jack the Ripper. She's written 2 of them. And she had one case closed, So her suspect was Walter Sickert, who was an artist, a German artist. But the problem is that he was never a suspect in the 19th century, because she claims that she had a stamp from one of the letters that had his DNA on. This is where it gets dicey, because and the other was an author named Russell Edwards, and he said that a person named Aaron Kosminski was the murderer. Well, folks, they can't both be right if they're both based on DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's had there was a shawl that was found near Catherine Eddowes after she was murdered. And so he bought this shawl, this author did. And he said, well, I had this DNA test on it, and it proves it's this Aaron Kosminski guy, because it matches up with like some of his descendants.
But like it was just a shawl that was around.
Well, the problem is there's 2 different types of DNA. Now I'm kind of floating into the deep end here with this, because I'm no scientist. So there's the nuclear DNA, and then there's mitochondrial DNA. And nuclear DNA degrades. So nuclear DNA will say you did it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas mitochondrial DNA will say, well, all of us in this room did it because we share the same thing. So it's not that, it doesn't really prove much. And in fact, this shawl may not even belong to her, because the interesting thing, it was found near her, not on her. So it's come down, and someone still has it. It's somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's come down to history as this big thing, this big piece of evidence they had, but it could be no evidence, really. And so, and Patricia Cornwell, she took a lot from the letters, but the letters have been kind of proved to be hoaxes. I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm just saying that when you dig deeper into this, you find there's some issues. And I suppose you could say that about anybody, any of these, because it's all speculation. And I'm like I say, I'm not saying that any of these authors are trying to mislead anybody. I think in their mind, they have enough evidence, but there's always something you can pull from that.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, it's like super retrospective to try to figure out who this was, and even thinking of like a more modern like mystery killer. When we think of like the Zodiac killer, like we still don't know who that is.
I was going to mention the Zodiac killer because he's another one where there was this string and then it stopped.
Yep.
So where did they go? If they weren't tied to the last 4, then either someone died or was institutionalized, which is another theme in this, or left. Queen Victoria, of all people, had actually a good a theory as anybody else.
Mm-hmm. What did she think?
Her theory was that this was a butcher or a cattle drover who would take ship to Europe, because they had these ships that would go back and forth, and the London docks aren't very far from Whitechapel. So this could be, and usually what would happen is you dock on a Thursday or a Friday, and you'd leave on a Saturday or a Sunday. Well, this is perfect timing.
Yep.
And then you also have this, that's why you may have this gap. They left, they went to Europe, they came back, they went again, they came back.
But then you get to why'd they stop?
That's a good question, which brings us to our good friend H.H. Holmes.
Oh, okay.
Because a descendant of H.H. Holmes, who was a feature character in the book The Devil in the White City, he's also an American serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
And a doctor, too. I don't think the University of Michigan runs around advertising that, because that's where he went to medical school. But in the 19th century, so. But he was a serial killer in Chicago during the World's Fair. But there's this missing part of his life between the fall of 1888 and the beginning of 1889. And someone was looking through, they were thumbing through these books where you'd sign your name when you would take passage from a ship back to America from England to America. And one of the people that signed it was H. Holmes, not H. Holmes, but just H. Holmes. So his descendant has kind of jumped on this and has been on all these specials, of course, probably making money off of it, saying, my descendant was Jack the Ripper. But the problem is the MOs don't match. Plus, there were more murders after that.
Mm-hmm.
And if Edmund Reed, who investigated these, he thinks the Ripper was responsible for 9 of these. So again, everyone is it's just all speculation. There's no proof.
Has anyone even thought that there might be more than one? Like maybe a copycat killer?
Well, that's what I thought too. In fact, in my notes, I wrote copycat somewhere in this jumble because I thought the same thing. Thinking, well, how do we know? Yeah, how do we know it was one person? Somebody has said, "Hey, this sounds good. Let's do this," or I want attention. That's always kind of the thing here too. So the interesting thing about the Dear Boss letter was after the investigation was over, it disappeared from the files. And in 1987, someone returned it anonymously to the Metropolitan Police, and that's why they have it in their possession today. You know what? I'd like to find that person because how did they have the letter?
Right? That makes it seem more genuine. Like someone who is, and keep in mind, no matter how brutal and how, I have no idea how they got away from a scene. That's the thing. Somehow they're able to sneak in and sneak out of somewhere.
And do all that.
Do that.
So
how they could return a letter.
Some of the speculation has been this was somebody who was part of the aristocracy and people were covering up for them, which could be a theory because it would explain why things were disappearing while suddenly witnesses couldn't be found. Because you're right. If this is happening, didn't anybody hear anything? I mean, and it could be right. I mean, it's very dark and it's middle of the night. I was amazed at Victorians how late they stayed up.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'd say, I went out for supper at 1:30 a.m. You see this in the eyewitness accounts. Or I went over for a dram of rum at 5:30 a.m. I'm thinking, I don't know. I get up in the morning and have orange juice.
Yeah, that's 30 minutes from waking up for me.
So no one seemed to normally sleep much during that time.
But the thing
there was always a lot of activity going on late at night. So you'd think someone would have saw something,
or at least hear a scream, like anything.
That's the other question.
There's just nothing. There's just a body. That's it.
Right. And one of the suspects, who was later said to be a suspect, was Prince Albert Victor, who was part of the royal family. And there's always been speculation that whoever did this was suffering from. He obviously did not like women, or I mean, a lot of speculation that this person was suffering from some kind of STD, so he's blaming the prostitutes for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was driving this person, because if you have syphilis, it affects your brain. So this could have been, again, I'm saying a lot of could haves because I don't know. So maybe that when this person was either institutionalized or died from this affliction, that's why those certain things stopped.
So there's no way we're not going to solve this, and I've said
I
this
could try.
before. We could try. We're not going to get it in the time we have. I mean, we could probably sit here for hours upon hours upon hours. But what has been influenced by these murders, by Jack the Ripper since then? Because there's no way they just were like, well, we can't do anything about it. Maybe the police forces developed something, or what's happened?
Well, I think it just was along the lines of policing as you went along, So I think one thing that threw me off a little bit was when we talked about Vidocq in the last one. Remember, he would put undercover people in all these places.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's one thing that the London police ever did, or the Whitechapel police. Like, just send some other undercover officers into these dives at night and see if they could pick up anything. But the legacy is that because of what happened, it drew attention to Whitechapel, and it actually started to change things. They tore down a lot of the slums, and because people were like, some people didn't realize what was going on there. I mean, it's sort of like 5 Points in New York, which we've talked about in other podcasts.
Yeah. And
so some of the poverty that they were seeing, they tried to tear down the slums to make it a little better there. And so, but yeah, and Jack the Ripper as a figure has changed perceptually, as we've moved along. In the 20s and 30s, he was sort of a loner who sort of just blended in with the crowd. It was in the 60s where we get the sort of aristocrat and the top hats and the cape, which is a little ridiculous. But it almost became like the aristocracy was preying on the working class.
Yeah.
And it sort of became that story.
I mean, I've seen interpretations of Jack the Ripper because it's essentially a legend at this point. Like, we're probably never gonna know more about.
No, and there's
Jack
so
the
many
Ripper.
tantalizing circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, I've seen, I've seen references in anime. I've seen references in movies and detective shows of, who could Jack the Ripper be, or what were they? That's part of where I got it's multiple people. It wasn't just one person. There's multiple people.
And there's actually a great movie. It's called Time After Time. It's from like 1979 with Malcolm McDowell. And I forget who plays Jack the Ripper, but he plays H.G. Wells, and he's friends with Jack the Ripper. And Jack the Ripper uses his time machine to come to 20th century San Francisco, where he says, I'm home, in the modern age, whereas Wells sees that his utopia never became anything. And it's kind of this interesting interplay between the two of them and their philosophies from that time going to this time.
See, I thought you were going to say, he says, I'm home, I'm the Zodiac Killer.
Oh, no.
Just like, that would be like,
Oh.
see, we're getting somewhere. Maybe
now
that solves
we're
the case.
Solve this thing. Time travel. I guess.
Yes.
But it's interesting because, like I said, there's these little details, like even the letter. So the 27th of September is when they got this letter, the Dear Boss letter. In the letter, he says something about, I will clip the lady's ear off and send it to you, meaning the police.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right on cue, Catherine Edos had part of her ear cut off. But the ear was never sent to the police. Well, half of it was. So now the speculation is, well, was it really a hoax, or are these guys just hoaxing? I mean, because this happened, but there's no tie that they know of. So it's just, I know there's always like this one thing that sort of leads you to say, And if you go to a Wikipedia page with a list of suspects, it's very long and it's not inclusive because there's like over 100. And even Lewis Carroll has been, the guy who wrote Alice in Wonderland, has been thrown out there as a suspect. But no one really has any historical evidence. They're just basing this on whatever. And even Kosminski, who was actually mentioned in a memo from 1894 from a guy who was then the police commissioner who worked on the Ripper case, he mentioned a Kosminski. That's all he said, though. But he mentioned two other guys, a guy named Montague Druitt, which is a great name, who had committed suicide after the murder of Mary Kelly, and that could be why it stopped.
Yeah.
And then another guy named Michael Ostrog, who modern researchers have no idea why he was included in that. So here we are with a big mystery.
Yeah, I feel like, and this is our like closer for a second season of Cruising Through History, and I feel like something that's come up so over and over is just these kind of legends of stories that become so much more than they thought they would be.
Right.
When we talked about VDuck last week, it was just like, first detective.
Yes.
And influencing a bunch of characters, Jack the Ripper, influencing so much of like gruesome suspense murders and characters.
Really the whole and everything in the 19th century is very melodramatic, and you can see that even in the writings about Jack the Ripper from that time. And even the newspaper headlines were like that too, very sensationalistic, very melodramatic. So yeah, I mean, I guess if someone asked me who did it, I have no idea. It wasn't Lewis Carroll, I don't think.
Probably not.
So.
Probably not. They're probably not the Zodiac Killer as well.
No.
But
your guess is as good as anybody's at this point, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe it was just a fairy godmother.
I mean, I don't want to laugh because I don't want to make light of it, but it's become such a cottage industry. It's sort of like the JFK assassination and other things. And I don't know if we'll ever know. I mean, we're so far away from it now, and it's 135 years now, and the evidence is so much of it's degraded or it's disappeared.
Yeah, I think history just isn't solid on everything. Like it's just it's not there.
And unless someone actually has some kind of deathbed confession, it shows up that someone said, well, there's a Dr. Cream, who was an American, who was sort of a killer here, was caught with murdering somebody in England. He did poison. Well, apparently when he was on the scaffold, because he was executed for this, he said, I am Jack and then of course the rope drops. But then no contemporary account of the people who are staying around him ever heard him say that.
Of course.
It's very Victorian though to have people saying either confessions on the gallows or warning people about don't live a life that I've lived. This is where you end up.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they actually said that, who knows? I mean, they would just write it in their stories.
Yeah.
Sort of a moral, like, don't go down the wrong road or else you'll end up here.
But it's dramatized. It's something the news can pick up on and run with for that week.
Right. Yeah.
And that's really been a lot. The news picks up on something and it blows up beyond whatever it was supposed to be. But really, I feel like that's kind of what our show's about.
Yeah.
Is things that have been either blown up and we're just like, what actually is it? Or things that are like, there's this little thing no one really knows about, and we just kind of want to put a light on it because it influenced so much. And I feel like that's what we do.
Right.
And this would usually be where I ask you, like, speaking of what are we going to look at next? There's always something, right? But
yes,
we're actually going to be taking another month break. We've got this whole second season we just did. We're going to take a month break, and we'll be back with more Cruising Through History for season 3. Hey. Ooh.
That was a lot of talking.
Yeah. We went over a little bit, but
That's
just for you all to know, I say you all, it's the camera over there. It's a break. This episode actually is the episode we just shot. Is going to release in like late June. So our break isn't a break for now. You'll get to this break through like July. So if you're planning on listening to us over summer vacation, sorry. But we're still releasing throughout. Yeah, Scott, that was, geez, I am always like, how in the world did these things happen?
Yes, this is one of the, I don't want to say stranger ones I've done, but there's a lot here.
Yeah.
And a lot of it I didn't know. I always thought it was just these 5 people, and
I thought it was more, to be honest, like with how much of a legend was there. And by the way, for everyone wondering what's going on, after the show, we always have like this discussion that's like 10, 15 minutes long that you don't get to hear. So yeah, I thought it was more because the legend was, from what I knew they were brutal, but I thought there was more than 5. Like I thought there would be like 10, maybe more than that. Even it was just like, huh.
Right.
But not really. Canonically, there's definitely the 5.
Yes.
But
even they've been portrayed so differently in different mediums. And the From Hell movie, Mary Kelly actually lives. I mean, it's not nonfiction; it's a movie. So unfortunately, in real life, she didn't. So
I wonder if VDOC would be able to solve the crime.
But when you read this stuff, though, it almost becomes like, after a while, you're thinking, what's the line here between exploitation and,
Well, I mean, isn't that what our true crime section is kind of about? It's like, that's true crime in general. Like
I kind of wanted to mention the victims as not being abstractions because I think it happens.
Yeah.
We don't look at them anymore as, yes, they were down in their luck, but they probably didn't deserve the fate that they got.
I think we've seen that in media when there was, I think, a relatively new Netflix show on Dahmer.
No.
And the families that were affected by Dahmer's murders were just like, can we not do this again?
Well,
because they've already been there.
And I think this will just go on because, like I said, the farther we get away from it, the more you can make all kinds of. I mean, most of the people that we think of as suspects were never suspects in the 1880s. They were modern writers that sort of glommed on to people. And even the commissioner who wrote that memo, and Montague Druitt was his number 1 suspect. But even that's got problems. Now, like I said, Druitt committed suicide after the last one, Mary Kelly. So he obviously wasn't responsible for the last ones. But again, he was just writing. He even had a name on there, Michael Ostrog. But it's interesting because he puts Kosminski. He doesn't say a first name. He just writes Kosminski. And that's who one of those authors thought it was too. Who was a Polish Jew who lived in the East End.
But it's like a bunch of people in the future just being like, I'm going to put these people in there and just maybe it's going to stick and maybe it's going to sell.
And I should have mentioned this while we were recording, but the people who study this are called ripperologists.
There's a
And-
field of study.
And so they've thrown out the Lewis Carroll thing. I mean, that's absurd.
Okay.
But then you look at the other ones, and I am Jack and the whole thing just sets up like a melodrama. I thought when I read it, but yeah, there's plenty. I mean, some of the boyfriends of and ex-husbands of the victims, but they were always cleared. They had alibis,
Yeah.
so it wasn't them. I think. I mean, I don't.
Does anyone online or here in person have any questions about like Jack the Ripper that? Because
Or
like
just our show in general.
or the show in general.
No, but I know Jack.
You do.
I didn't even know this was a Jack show. These are the fog bunnies who live in Kenosha, and the story is on the back. I don't know if anybody can see it. Read it. Anyone read it?
I don't
Sure,
have my
sure.
glasses on.
So bunnies only in name. Fog bunnies are more like coyotes, prowling the shores of Lake Michigan on the hunt for anyone foolish enough to walk alone when a fog is settled in. It is said that Kenosha's first fog bunny arrived on a Friday, one frigid December evening, shortly after Jack the Ripper's last kill in the misty streets of London in 1888.
That's funny. And that really, that, oh my God.
Yeah,
fits
that's
right
good
in.
timing because we don't say what our shows are beforehand. Like I think only some staff here at the library were the only ones that knew that we were going to be talking
Right.
about Jack the Ripper. So that's funny.
Well, when we first talked about doing this back in January, December, I
Yeah.
thought of this subject. So I've been holding it because I thought, well, this would be a good one to kind of do. So I've been kind of holding on to it. But then we did one last week on the first detective, and I thought these can, and no one's heard the one on VDoc yet. You will, but these can lead into the other one,
Yeah,
which we've done before with different episodes too.
We don't do that on purpose, by the way. That just kind of happens.
Right.
The first season started with Lincoln and ended with Lincoln.
And that was just by accident.
So, I think the only time something's been planned is, and these aren't out yet either. There's one on lighter than air travel, and then
Well, we did
heavier than air
heavy air
travel,
travel.
and there was one after the other. But that's because like you can't talk about both in 30 minutes, really.
Right. So we started out with like history of ballooning. Again, and a lot of our shows take place in the 19th century.
At least this season.
Yeah, and even the Shakespeare riots and that was from that. And that's not really, I mean, that's one of my areas of interest, but it's not really, it's not deliberate. I just sort of think of topics, and a lot of times that's when they are.
Yeah, you're probably gonna start next season 3 with World War II, something. Just be like, let's get back to my area.
Yeah, I mean, I think of how the 19th century was changing so much, and that's why all these little things were happening. The work class things and urbanization, industrialization, and
Mhm.
poverty. I mean, all these things were. I mean, they happened before, but
I mean, you say that,
communications revolution, transportation, that kind of thing.
you say that. We've also done a lot of world traveling.
Oh yeah,
Because we had this whole stint where we were in Macedon, was it? Or
yes,
yeah,
Alexander the Great.
Macedon. We did talk in with Genghis Khan. We were in the Sahara for a while.
Yes,
So we were just going everywhere.
and that was just and when I did Genghis Khan and then I did Alexander the Great. Well, it's only because I thought, well, Genghis Khan went this way. Who went that way? So I mean, it wasn't like I sat down and did one of these thinking posters or something. I just thought, well, Genghis Khan came from the east, Alexander came from the west, and they both went, So sometimes it's things like that is how we think or how I think of a topic. There's no muse or anything involved or lightning strike or anything.
No.
So
And yeah, as you could tell, Scott has all the notes. I have 0 notes. I don't do research. I barely remember what topic Scott's going to talk about. So it's a bit of it's fun kind of coming in and not knowing. I feel like I'm part of the audience a little bit when Scott brings in a topic and brings up details that I'm absolutely fascinated by. Because most of what Scott talks about, I will never have heard about. Now, if Scott's talking about something I know of, I'm gonna step in and be like, no, I got this. This is my area.
Right, right.
Which has happened before. Anything involving English lit usually, or
Well, dragons.
yeah, dragons was the big one. If we ever, I don't think we've gone Nordic yet, have we?
Only a bit when we talk about dragons.
Yeah. So we haven't
When
really.
we talk
gone
about
there.
the Ida, was that
We did.
That's
We
Scandinavian.
did. That I know. Okay.
Norse? That's Norse.
So I mean,
But that was part of the dragon thing, I think.
yeah.
So-
Or we've talked about books before. Some of the Penny
Right.
Dreadfuls and entertainment.
Yes.
I just kind of know things about that, but I'm not that big of a history person. But I do like talking. So I have some background and enough to keep up with.
And I usually, sometimes I find these little things where I include them. When we did the Shakespeare riots, I was reading that someone had actually thrown a carcass of a goat or something up on the stage, and I'm thinking I can see throwing like tomatoes and vegetables or whatnot, but to actually throw a carcass, I thought, wow, that's really something. So I wrote a note to put it in and say it when we were talking.
Yeah, those strange little things that make me go just like.
And a lot
"What
of
in the
times I get
world?"
my ideas from books too, because there'll be books on these different subjects that I haven't thought of,
or TV.
or TV.
Something going on in the news, and we're just like, oh yeah, that's neat. Let's talk about that because it relates to whatever
Well,
you're
the
talking
one
about.
when we did the mustard gas and chemotherapy, there was actually a book about it. And I sort of ran across it and went, oh, that'd be a good, or the horror in World War One. I thought, well, that'd be a good one to talk about. So
I think because you also, if I remember right, you also get ideas from like you'll be researching one show and then you see something and you're like, well, I've got to do a show.
yeah,
on
I
this now.
have a Post-it note on my desk where if I get an idea, I write it down. So I've got a couple there now that are just now. If we do them, I don't know. It's just something that comes to me.
Okay.
So, but like I said, it's usually just serendipity that I figure out, or else I'll be scrambling 5 minutes before our one show, going, "What on earth should I do? Oh yeah, this sounds good."
Well, I can't tell if that's the case because I don't think I've ever seen you do a show without notes or a book in front of you. So maybe you're just faking it this whole time and it could have fooled me.
Well, this one I kind of knew a lot of this, so I was checking my notes, but then sometimes I get lost, so I just start. And then we had an episode where I dropped my notes. So
Yep.
we were talking, and I went like that, and I told Zander, and I did the rest of the show just off the top of my head. So my notes were all, and they did that. They spread out all over the floor. So I couldn't like get up and go grab them. So I just told him. And then there's been times when Zander has asked me something. If I don't know, I've written on my paper, I don't know, and I figured it out. So he'll immediately like switch into something else.
Yeah.
Like it might just be a question that I didn't see coming or something, So
Yeah. So I have
these guys are fun moments doing
So
that.
I have broadcast experience, so things will happen. Like I think we're in a library, so it's still a public building. Like so we'll hear pounding on the wall or something, and Scott looks at me like with this panicked look, and I'm just like keeps talking.
Well, remember the day, Jason probably remembers this, when someone walked in.
Yeah.
And I stopped because I just naturally just stopped talking.
And I was just like, nope, keep going. We're doing a show.
Or I sometimes will twirl my pen. Well, it's flown out of my hand a couple of times.
Yep.
I don't think you can hear it.
Yeah. I mean, Jason does a great job with. However, Jason's doing the sound editing to make sure that stuff doesn't get in. Somewhere in there, I don't know where he's doing it. He's doing it somewhere.
Well, I got an email. We got an email from a patron, and she said, "It sounds like you do your show in front of a live audience." I said, "No, I think that's just added in the applause."
Yeah.
I demanded it. I demanded applause. So
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
yeah, it's been pretty fun doing this, I think. So, and I'm normally the collection development and cataloging librarian. I just happen to have a master's degree in history, and so
Oh, I didn't know you had a master's.
yeah,
So.
Zander's predecessor in this position, he wanted to do a podcast, and I was the only one who volunteered, but we never got it off the ground. And then when Zander wanted to do one, I said, "Oh, I'll do it." No one else volunteered, so I thought, "Oh, I'll do it." What the heck? So,
We're still here.
and we're still here, and we have our listeners are growing. So,
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Thoughts, questions?
Anything coming in, Rob? Or does it tell us how many people watched our stream?
Yeah, we got 10.
Oh, good.
I don't know. That's good.
Well, that's here. You got 14. And people will hear this episode anyway. But
Yeah, that's a thing. Oh, is that is just a
Oh,
okay.
okay.
That's the thing. So, we record these ahead of time. Like I said, this is going to release in June. So I get to, so after the show, I don't just come but walk in and talk. That's not all I do. So I will get an audio file from Jason. I get to upload it to what's called Anchor, Anchor by Spotify, or I think they just called Spotify Podcasts now. They changed their name, and that connects to basically all the streaming platforms, all the podcast platforms that we go on. And I'd say we actually have a good set of listeners to our show. So whether it's, I think Apple Podcasts is really popular with us. I think then it's Spotify, but that's only like the straight up podcasting areas. Rob's been recently posting them to YouTube as well. And that's gotten a lot of views. And it's interesting which episodes are getting views. Because Operation Mincemeat on our podcasting ones, which is Scott, could you describe Mincemeat real quick, just so that for people that haven't listened to it, because I'm like, oh God, I'm forgetting that.
In World War II, before the invasion of Sicily, what the British did is they actually got a corpse and they dressed it up as an English officer, and they put all these fake documents on him, and chucked it into the Mediterranean. And of course, the Germans picked it up. And what it was is, this backstory was that there was a plane crash in the Mediterranean, so they kind of made it look like that. And so they got all these documents that were bogus. And I thought, man, that's really going out there on a limb to go find a corpse to, dress up and everything. But that's what they did.
Yeah.
And it was to aid Operation Husky. And another problem with World War II is there are all these operations going on. So
yeah, we've talked about at least two of them at this point.
Operation Underworld.
Yeah. But that's been our most popular, like on the podcasting sites, and then on YouTube it's sitting at like under 10 views, and we're just like, okay.
Figure that out.
I often say the algorithm giveth, the algorithm taketh away. So
Right.
The algorithm, when we go algorithms, that's really been it's kind of whatever. I mean, that's the thing. The show is educational and fun. We do have a regular viewership that's pretty consistently growing. It's not it's not taking off, but it's
we're not Joe Rogan territory.
No. And if we ever get to that territory, I think I'll get a new job.
Someone said that. It's so funny because I said to somebody, I was doing a podcast, and they said, like Joe Rogan. I said, not quite. So, but we have our loyal listeners, and or watchers, and that's fine.
Well, I mean, both.
Yes.
It's really fun. And Scott, I mean, this is getting Scott broadcast stuff, because I mean, I think the other day I asked, like, Scott, have you ever had your name in like a newspaper even? He was like, no. I was like, well,
under police file, but just under arrest.
Oh
no.
God. Okay.
I'm kidding, of course.
But yeah, I was just like, wow.
I never have, I don't think.
I've been on done some live broadcasts. Been in high school. I was more in newspapers, but I've been in the newspaper here before in Kenosha.
Oh.
So yeah, I
But
think
you're more out there.
I am more. So I'm the digital strategy librarian. I'm kind of in front of people. I get our ebooks and stuff. Most of the history things I will listen to on e-audio, actually, if I do listen to it, because I cannot read a history book. It's just not with my eyes. It's not going to happen.
And really, the whole genesis of this was, in our department, I always would tell stories.
Yep.
And then I had a colleague, and she said, "You should do a podcast." He said, "You're always telling these stories I've never heard before." And I said, "You should call it Cruising Through History." And I went, "Yeah, who's going to go for that name?" So then when I met with KCM, and she was in on the meeting too, I said, "I have a bunch of names here." So I went, "Well, Cruising Through History." And everyone said, "That's the one." And I said, "Okay." So
Scott's last name, we call it Cruise on here, but it could also be Crows.
yes, it's Kroes is my last name. It's how it's spelled. People say it differently. I only say Crows when I think I go to the doctor, so I have to keep spelling it because they know how to. If I say Cruz, they don't know which spelling.
Yeah. So that has been
And crowsing through history just does not.
No, I mean
Sounds like we're gallivanting or something.
we
skipping
could
through
maybe
history.
have done like the crows of history, maybe.
I don't like crows anyway. I like Cruz better.
True. And that means when we do our little ads, we can be driving our car. That's usually how we're doing them. It's just like we're driving around.
I don't
going
torture
through
that
history.
analogy. When we first started, I would always make some. As we drive down, I thought, oh boy, I'm really torturing that thing.
I mean,
So
I always
I
we
thought
start
better
the show.
stop.
I mean, I start the show seriously every single time the same way, and with the same kind of tone. I wonder how many episodes you could like overlay the sound for, and it's just gonna echo the same thing.
And then I say, well, Zander, today we're going to.
Yeah,
we go.
because I always say, where are we cruising through today, or what are we cruising through today?
Right.
Just because we're going everywhere, really. Because
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like each stage of my life, where I was interested in what historical period. That's why there's ancient stuff in there too, because that's kind of where I started, and then. So yeah, after all these years, it's just built up.
one of these days we'll talk like modern history, like we'll get into 2000s or something.
Yeah.
Maybe we're like too soon. Not gonna happen.
And some things you have to sort of avoid, just
Yeah. And yeah, we don't talk about every topic that comes to mind. We will take topic suggestions though. So for the folks that are in the building, we have a whiteboard behind the chairs. Feel free to give us topics to talk about. Because we will be planning season 3. We are doing that for the planning it now. I think we're recording in a few weeks again, and there's also folks online. You can leave a message in the comments, the chat. We can also be emailed, and Rob will put in the email for you as well. Wherever it's being streamed to right now.
right.
So you can contact us or just say hi. We'll accept that too. Just say hi. We don't bite. So yeah, it's pretty fun.
I jokingly, my friend from Tennessee was visiting last year, and I jokingly said to him, we went to the boathouse for dinner, and I said, now watch out, because if I walk in and I'm recognized, don't panic. Just people might rush up to us. Just I'm used to it now. No. He just laughed. I said, I don't think anybody's going to recognize me.
Not from your voice, at least.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Because I mean, funnily enough, I think I have not been. No, I have been recognized at a grocery store here, but I work in front of the public.
Well, I
most
have
of the
been
time.
like long ago when used to work at Northside as a reference librarian long ago, and I was in Piggly Wiggly one day, and people said, "Hey, I know you," and I said, "Yeah."
Yeah. I mean, this is
You're
really
the dude
small.
that works at the library. I said, "I sure am that dude."
Yeah, you're that dude. You're that dude that talked about Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, that'll be my new claim to fame.
Yes. But yeah, I think honestly, we're thank you for joining us, everyone.
Yes, all you
been-
people online too.
It's been quite a journey. The podcast continues. We'll be here. We'll keep talking about history. We'll keep cruising through history. But yeah, I think that cuts it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, now we can talk.